Good morning, everyone, and also good afternoon or good evening to those of you who've joined from a little bit further afield. We've got some really great companies on today from all over the globe. So first of all, I'd like to thank you all for taking the time out to join us on this joint Turnkey and SailPoint webinar. Today we'll focus on the topic of managing identity and access management, or IAM, across both the enterprise and SAP landscapes. So I'm Chris Boyle, Director of Identity and Access Management at Turnkey Consulting, and I'll be your host for the session. I'm joined today by two experts in their respective fields. Our very own Simon Percy, who is also our resident SAP security guru, and joined also by Mark Aldroyd, who's our SailPoint expert and identity evangelist. Now, before I ask our panelists to introduce themselves and we begin the session, I just wanted to go through the agenda, a little bit of housekeeping, and also talk about the fantastic giveaway we have today, which is kindly provided by SailPoint. So shortly I'll ask Mark and Simon to introduce themselves, followed by a very brief introduction to Turnkey, what we do in our partnership with SailPoint and SAP, a little bit of background and context to the upcoming panel talk, and then we'll have the main event where Simon and Mark will answer questions around the topic of identity and SAP in a panel style. Then what we'll do is we'll follow that by the big giveaway. So just to give a brief summary of that, we have a number of maturity assessments that SailPoint have kindly provided, that we can offer to a select number of you guys who have joined the live webinar. So we'll provide details of how to do that towards the end of the session, just before the Q&A. So once we've talked about the chance where you can run one of those assessments, we'll then move on to the final segment, which is a live question and answer session, where you can ask our panelists any questions that you think of throughout the webinar. So just from a housekeeping perspective, if you could ask any questions you may have in the Q&A window, we'll pick them up at the end. Or if you have a burning desire to ask a question during, please just use the raise a hand function and we'll try to accommodate that. One final thing, the session is being recorded. Cool. So with that done, what I will do is I'd like to introduce our panelists for today. So Simon, would you like to give an introduction?
Sure, thanks, Chris. So yeah, my grand job title is the Operations Director with a global remit within Turnkey. Don't let that fool you though. As Chris said, I've been a practitioner in a previous life. I've been working within the SAP authorizations and security field since probably about 2002. So yes, I'm a little bit older than I look as well. So just had a very easy paper round when I was younger. But yeah, worked within that utility sector within the UK, was a security architect for one of the big four energy firms, working in their corporate center business. I've been there, done it, designed, implemented, supported and assessed security implementations and governance risk compliance initiatives throughout that sort of time. Also did a stint in the Big Four, so I've seen it from a report writing point of view and an assurance side of things as well. So know what people are looking for from an audit and assurance background, know how to beat up the auditors as well when it's required, and I've spent a lot more of my time now in the consultancy framework trying to do the right things by our clients, but also making sure that they toe the line from an assurance point of view.
Perfect. Thank you, Simon. Mark?
Great, thanks, Chris. So yeah, my name's Mark Aldroyd. Been with SailPoint since 2012. So working in this area quite extensively. Most of my day job in SailPoint is related to working with the partner community, organizations like Turnkey, making sure that they have everything they need from a SailPoint perspective. But I also do a lot of evangelist type work and speaking and various other things. So again, we have multiple hats within SailPoint. Similar to Simon, I look older than I am, probably, rather than older than I look. So been in the industry for a very long time. I came through from a technical programming background, consulting, practice lead. And then in the early 2000s moved into the vendor space and started working with a number of vendors focusing on the identity arena. So I've been doing that for almost 20 years now.
Excellent. Thanks, Mark. So that's our panel. Just for those who have joined who have not worked with us before, I just wanted to give you a brief overview of Turnkey and who we are. We're essentially a consulting company that has been established for around 16 years. Predominantly, our heritage was in the SAP security field. However, in the last 4 years, we've moved into the IAM space and also cybersecurity as well. So as part of our partnerships, we partner heavily with SAP and SailPoint. We deliver everything from advisory, implementation, and support, and also we provide a managed service for our clients, a fully managed service, if you like. We do this with a team of over 100 consultants from 7 global locations. So we're in the UK, France, Germany, Singapore, Australia, US, and our managed service team is based in Malaysia. So just from an SAP perspective, we've delivered more than 500 SAP security projects over the years, and we've got one of the highest customer satisfaction ratings in the SAP consulting community. So from an identity perspective, we've also delivered numerous SailPoint projects globally on both the SailPoint IIQ and Identity Now, their SaaS platform, integrating with SAP for some of the world's largest companies. So I wanted to just set a little bit of background and context before we hand over to the panelists. And the way I wanted to do that was share a little bit of insight I've seen over the last 20 years in the IAM arena. And the reason for that is, I guess, the view of most identity-centric IAM kind of system integrators, if you like, is that SAP is just another application that needs to be integrated with. So you can see from the sort of left-hand side of this diagram that most sort of architecture diagrams, etc., typically just show SAP as a single box, as amongst the rest of the applications around the business. But actually, once you delve into SAP, you can see there from the top right that actually, SAP is a hugely complex ecosystem. It's made up of many applications. Each of those, contain complex security modules, differing security modules. They need to be managed and governed. But again, also so does the access across the wider application. So one of the things that Turnkey and SailPoint we understand is the importance of being able to manage not only the SAP environment but also the wider enterprise. So today we've got our 2 experts that can help us understand both why and how we can achieve the utopian vision of being able to govern and manage identities across both the enterprise and the SAP environment. So without further ado, and to help discuss these topics and more, we'll go over to our panel section where we'll answer some of the burning questions, if you like. And just to reiterate before we do, if you do have any questions, please do put in the Q&A session, and we'll answer those at the end. So on to the first question, which leads on from what I was just talking about, the complexity of SAP. So I guess probably one for you to kick off with, Simon, here. How can you overcome the complexity of the SAP landscape?
I mean, that's really good considering the previous slide that you put up there. And I think the first thing to understand is whether SAP is complex or not. So despite the messaging that SAP used for a little while, which was run simple, the SAP architecture and the actual functional deployment of it is anything but. So it's very much like a swan, where at the end user level, you want everything to work and it should be very simple to use and it should be easy to operate. Behind the scenes, there's a whole level of different competing and conflicting architectural statements and infrastructure that's actually being brought together to run it. So I think the only way you can try and overcome that is really through knowledge of exactly what it is that you're running. So a lot of the time we are trying to help clients to educate what they've actually bought, whether that's from a licensing point of view or whether that's through an operational usage point of view, to try and understand, well, what are the services, what are the actual transactions that they're trying to use, and therefore what technical components have they deployed, what architecture do those things need to operate effectively, and then kind of make sense of it all. Now, whether that's talking about traditional ABAP and SAP NetWeaver stacks, or whether we're talking about some of the newer ones with HANA and all of those kind of in-memory database type processing activities, whether we're talking about Fiori apps with the harmonized user interface, or whether we're still talking about people who are one step up from black screens with green text. You have to understand what it is that you're actually talking about, and understand the different languages that people are saying. Are talking in. So that's really the art, is trying to understand the architecture and understand what people mean by the different acronyms. And that's only going to get worse as 2 of those letters are taken up with either HANA or cloud as parts of everything that SAP is going to market with. So we focus in on understanding that with the expertise that we've got and the appreciation about what the different user access journeys need to be from root to tip, and understand the different components that are in the landscape and how to make them work together rather than conflict with each other. And I can only imagine what that looks like from a SailPoint point of view. So Mark, if you've got anything that you've seen on how you overcome the complexity, then I'm all ears to know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just sort of building on that, Simon. There's kind of 2 areas where we see differing complexities. And I think it's probably fair to say that SAP is the most complex application environment that we connect to across our customer base. For many of the reasons you've just pointed out, there's a huge amount of modules that are available, lots of acronyms. Us as a not an SAP specialist organization, we struggle continuously to understand what's happening in the SAP space and all of the changes and modules that are available. So that's complex. We see huge variation in the deployments across customers. There's nothing like a standardized SAP deployment. We also see some unique things, like quite often SAP customers, when we're deploying a governance solution, customers want us to connect to production, non-production, development, UAT, integration environments, in order to make sure that we can apply controls across those different environments. That's not actually something we typically see in many other application spaces. So that again is quite a unique thing to us. So that's one area of complexity that we see. The other area of complexity, and I'm sure we're going to get into this in more detail, is the access controls that exist within SAP itself. So obviously, as customers, most of you on the call are familiar with the huge plethora of roles and profiles and T codes and authorization objects and groups and everything else that exists in SAP. The challenge from a governance perspective is we have to almost abstract that view. We have to build something that allows us to compare what's going on in the SAP world with other applications, non-SAP applications, because clearly organizations like SailPoint and governance tools like we provide, they're operating at the enterprise level rather than deep inside the SAP space. So that has proved to be it is a challenge when you're deploying these kind of solutions. It is a challenge to vendors to keep up with this, be able to make sense of all of this. SailPoint as an organization, we've kind of gone down both paths. We've included the ability to abstract access to these, what we call the entitlement level. So typically we're modeling access at the role and profile level, which allows us to have some sort of control. But also in recent years, we've actually made the decision to go deeper into SAP. So again, we can model T codes and authorization objects if the customer wants to do that. And I'm sure we'll get into the discussion about what's the relevant tool for doing those things. But yeah, it is a very complex environment. There's a lot of things to consider when we're deploying governance in these solutions. Not only what is existing and what SAP tools are in place, but also what are we trying to achieve in governance terms.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, to reiterate, the biggest thing that we see is that you can't just assume that SAP is just that one core ERP. That you've got a myriad of different types of technology sets there, which come with different ways to authorize different technical solutions. And so designing a connector that just goes, oh, well, that will talk to SAP. Well, what flavor? What about if you've got users here with use privileges? What about if you're using indirect assignments for HR privileges or context sensitive attributes that are relevant there? And you have to make sure that that works in conjunction with everything else that's going on, as you say, within the SAP environment, within the SAP universe, and also being coherent outside of it as well. And the worst thing is to try and have multiple different processes for joiners, movers, leavers, that you have to remember that, oh, because that's SAP, it works differently. That's where we're focusing together, I suppose, is to try and make sure that there's that single journey through that will work in all cases.
Yeah. Life was much easier when we just had the ABAP interface.
Wasn't it just?
Yeah, and I think from a from an IAM perspective, it's the one thing that's great about SailPoint is it's not trying to reinvent the wheel as you like. It's integrating with the existing capabilities that SAP has rather than trying to replace them. So that's always great. Cool. So on to the next question is around the constraints regarding connecting in or out of the SAP world. So I guess again, Simon, do you want to take a stab at that first?
Well, I could do, but I might want to actually pass this straight across to Mark, because I think from an outsider's perspective, I'd be more interested to see what the constraints are that Mark comes across when he's doing these sorts of projects, and seeing whether he's got a view as to why connecting to SAP is so difficult within that regard. And then I can perhaps talk about maybe why those constraints exist.
Okay. So obviously we're looking at this from the question's kind of two parts, really. We're looking at connecting in from the outside world. And we're obviously trying to get a vision or a viewpoint of what's going on in the SAP space, who are the users, what access do they have, and then we can start to apply our governance controls on top of that. So we've already touched on some of the challenges. In the history of SAP, we've been a technology partner for well over 5, maybe 6 years now. We've been developing SAP connectors. We've had them certified by SAP. A lot of them in the early days were sort of BAPI type integrations into the the R3 and the ECC environments. Life was relatively simple back then, certainly from an API perspective. But that's obviously changed significantly, especially over the last few years, with all the additional cloud solutions that SAP are either buying in or constructing. So we've now got a variety of interfaces. Underpinning that, we've got a variety of different access control models in each of these applications. So the challenge to us, again, is kind of getting back to this abstraction layer, being able to pull all of this data from these various different SAP applications and basically level them up to a point where we can actually start applying governance controls. Now that, to a company like SailPoint, is the same challenge we have when we look at the whole IT enterprise. We have to do that across Active Directory and your Oracle estate and your Salesforce estate. So that it's kind of something that we do anyway. But keeping up with the connectivity within SAP is a particular challenge. Chris's diagram earlier on kind of hinted at what's been happening. And I think a lot of organizations, certainly the SAP specialists in organizations, are aware of these changes in the SAP world and the the implications of connecting into this complex environment. But outside of the SAP teams, when we talk to CIOs and CISOs and that kind of level, they're perhaps not quite as up to date about what's happening in the SAP space. And obviously, that may start to introduce potential risk and issues in access controls in that area.
Super. So if I can add to that, Mark, I think from my point of view, I think that we see some similar constraints from the connection out from SAP, if I was to take that kind of slant. But I'd almost put them into three different camps, really. You've got technical constraints, you've got governance and requirements constraints, and you've then got the business change management side of things as well. So, I mean, for me, we've spoken about the technical ones there. It's a myriad of conflicting and different technical settings, whether or not they've got the right modules in place, whether there's an existing SAP identity management solution or an existing SAP governance solution, such as the GRC stacks, or potentially another third-party thing doing something in that space. You've got all of those technical challenges to overcome to make sure that you've got that correct way or that complete way of doing things. But the governance angle, I think, is a really big constraint, that quite a lot of the times the governance model for SAP is another ecosystem in its own right. It's got significant sensitivity pertaining to the data that it controls or the business transactions that it's operating, and the tolerance for disruption to that from either a governance or a controls point of view is normally pretty significant. So you're not allowed to play in the play pits particularly often. You're not allowed to do exactly what you want without any kind of interaction with the wider world, and that links on with the change management side of things as well. I mean, as we've spoken about, you can call a privilege many different things. Now in SAP, it might be an authorization, it could be a transaction code authorization object, or the technical settings of how you authorize. You may call it an entitlement, and if you're not talking the same language, you can automatically infer things that are different and not meaning to when you're talking about the same thing. So the amount of times that we have kind of translations going on in our head about whether we're talking SAP terminology or non-SAP terminology, and if people assume that you're talking about something that you're not, you automatically have a difference of opinion or a gap there in the engagement model. So whether you were talking about the technology constraints, about how can we actually do this, can we meet these end-to-end requirements, whether we're talking about the governance, who's got something to lose by the disruption or who's got anything to go on with it, or whether we're just talking about how to talk to other people and make sure that our requirements and our shared understanding is a shared understanding, not just an assumed understanding, then there are one or two constraints in the SAP world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you kind of wrap around that all of the, once you kind of wrap those constraints up, you've then got to provide a user experience that kind of transcends both of those different terminologies and different languages, etc. So that's always a challenge.
I think one thing to add to that, I think things certainly on the technical side are changing. There's quite a lot of flux at the moment, certainly with what SAP is doing. SAP GRC 12, and the IAG bridge, and a lot of these technologies that are coming along are almost giving us almost a connection point into the SAP world. So we've already started to look at using that kind of environment, using SAP GRC as the conduit to all the other SAP environments for things like provisioning and policy enforcement. So, if SAP continues down that path, that's going to make life potentially a little bit easier for vendors like SailPoint.
Well, it might do, but it might not as well. The biggest thing, I've just happened to see a question that's come in, and I wonder if we can pick that up now, actually. I know, Chris, it's meant to be your bag, but I've just seen it, and they're talking about managing complex hybrid landscapes, including on-prem, private cloud, public cloud, SaaS, everything's, and all the rest of it. And I think it's really important to note that when we're talking about SAP's direction and where they're going with things, there's a lot more cloud providers. From an SAP point of view, there's a lot more cloud products coming out, and that just adds to the complexity and the constraints that we may have, because there'll be some that we can interface with very, very easily and that they're very open, and there'll be some where we have to engage with SAP directly to be able to get the right access to those tenants and the right access to those provisioning hooks to be able to perform what we need to do. And that opens up a huge different governance model issue about who actually has the ownership of that particular component, and how can we collectively as implementers and software vendors bridge that gap? How can we provide that solution to be able to manage these landscapes where you want your user set up with a simplistic journey? I think most of those conversations are being had. There will always be some that drop between the gaps, but for the most part, as Mark was saying, the APIs are being built in as standard as microservices. They're thinking about some of those provisioning journeys and everything else, but from a security point of view, we do have to bear that in mind and ask some of those qualifying questions to say, how much control do we have over what people are authorized to do within those tenants, as opposed to just taking what SAP says is the way.
Yep.
Fantastic. Cheers, guys. So just moving on. Yeah, so who would like to talk about the shades of grey and the criticality of access?
I think that one's probably more for me. That's close to my GRC heart, really. And talking about the risk thing, I can probably detect that Mark's going, whew, thanks. but yeah, again, it comes back to the importance about what is SAP and what's it for. And depending on your business deployment, depending on your architectural solution, and depending on what it's actually intended to do, you'll have a myriad of different elements which will either be of interest to an audit firm or a cyber attacker to be able to breach you or your business. So that level of criticality of access is paramount to understand, because it may be different for each individual company. So we work with many of our clients to understand what are the crown jewels that you're protecting within the SAP estate, and it links to those governance and those control areas. And it's not just those standard users, let's say the DDIX or the CPIC users, which are there with pretty much widely known generic passwords. If you haven't changed them, please change them. So you've got some of those key entry points that every system and application layer will have, but depending on what you're using SAP for, you may find that it's a functional account that is the most important thing. If that's what's running the intellectual property that's sitting within your SAP system, be that recipes for the latest COVID-19 vaccine that's sat in a pharmaceutical firm, could be that, or be just the financial statement to understand whether you're just about to be floated on the stock exchange and you're wrapping up a company to try and be divested, or whatever it is. If people can get inside that SAP environment and people can understand what it's being used for, they can run roughshod over all of the business controls and understand what's going on there. So that could be a significant risk to both the operation of the business or the share price of the business, or whatever. So again, it comes back to the understanding of what that criticality is, and then putting in place the appropriate control measures. And that could be through the use of a firefighter or a privileged access scenario. It could be a piece of technology in there, or it could be just reinforcing joiners, movers, levers, process controls that are already in place through the likes of SailPoint automation and understanding what that is. But the biggest thing to take away from that is it's not just a 1 or a 0, critical or not. There's always that flexibility as to what's important to you, your business, and the lack of disruption to it.
Yeah. And just to add to that, I mean, again, I've mentioned this already. SailPoint is not, we're not an SAP focused set of technologies. We are generic across the organization. So the approach from SailPoint perspective is we collect everything in that environment that we can pretty much get our hands on, all the accounts, all the permissions, and the linkage down to T code or other levels if you want to go that far. So we're pulling everything in here. The challenge we have, which is exactly as Simon kind of discussed, is trying to understand what is the criticality of that, and therefore is this access appropriate for these particular users. And what we try and do within the SailPoint environment is transfer that question as much as possible out to the business owners, the line managers, the application owners. We want them to make that decision. We have the challenge of providing them as much information as we can to make that decision relatively straightforward for them to make. So yeah, it's not a technology problem that we're talking about here. It's really understanding the environment, the implementation, and the various levels of criticality. And this is really why SAP specialist partners like Turnkey are very important to SailPoint. They have the knowledge to be able to go in and do that to enhance the deployment of our technologies more than we could possibly do.
Yeah, because I guess SailPoint's got the ability to define the different risk levels and criticality, but it all comes down to what the business determines as that. So it's good having the functionality, but it's using that to be effective is absolutely key.
And that's where we spend most of our time, helping companies to organize their access risk rule sets and what they deem as being critical or sensitive. But it's not just about the access world, is it? I mean, you can't control everything with access. There are other things going on, whether that's automated inherent controls or just conventions and policies. But as long as we've got that picture as to what's important, then we can look at the most appropriate control point to protect it.
Absolutely. Cheers, guys. So the penultimate question is, why having coherent job to role mappings and coherent security is important, and what are the differences between them?
Nice.
So who wants to go for this one?
Well, again, this is a passion of mine, to try and preach the nirvana situation where everything is already nice and ordered, and recognizing the fact that it doesn't exist. So I've never met an organization who's actually technically managed to achieve this 100%. We've got some that have got close, but ultimately what you want to have if you're using a proper role-based access scenario is clarity that your jobs are there for a purpose, and the functions of those jobs are effectively preordained, otherwise you wouldn't have hired the person into the job. So the nirvana in my world is that job has a defined job description, it has a set of defined job responsibilities, and that those job responsibilities are enshrined within the roles or the authorization scenario. That means that job is completely defined from a functional and a technical perspective. Now, if you've got that, congratulations, first of all, I'd love to hear from you. But if you've got that, it then stands to reason that when somebody is hired into a job, whether that's through an HR process, an e-recruitment process, whether you're using success factors or traditional HCM or Workday or whatever other HR application, that should trigger some sort of access management process, and that the security design that has been proposed within that HR environment and HR world is then automatically provisioned. Thus, you get the right people hired on the right days with the right access to do the job without any kind of delinquency or that time lag from doing so. Now, that's pretty tough to even get the joiners process sorted out from the ground up, let alone then thinking about movers and how people are changing within the organization, and having leavers who are leaving the organization in a timely manner, and having it all kind of reversed through with the right level of approval. But there also come a load of constraints with that as to who owns that job to role mapping, who then owns the instantiation of that job definition in a technical authorization point of view. And particularly within SAP, you can have HR with some sort of involvement, you can have line managers who say, but that's not what I want that job to do. Then you've got the security practitioners going, well, this is what the roles that we've designed, and this is what that job role can do, but that's not what the job is meant to be for. And so if you're talking at different cross purposes across the technical and the functional side, then you're always going to have that disconnect. And then all you need is somebody to say, oh yeah, but I want that person to take a supervisory responsibility because I just know that they're capable of doing it. Growing up and the succession planning in the organization means that you almost have to be a little bit more agile with what people want. And suddenly you've broken that security strategy. You've broken that convention because you need to put a people aspect onto the top of it. So that, I think, is probably where the differences come, in that your security design is often built to control and constrain and limit it from a governance point of view, whereas your job definition is more often than not wants to be most permissive. So you've got two different approaches there to say, do you want to follow least privilege and toe in the line of compliance, or do you want to have most permissive in terms of being able to do what you need to do to make your business run? And that's the tightrope that we're always trying to walk, that's saying we want to provide the most access to people that isn't going to conflict with any sort of compliance requirement, and is also going to be built with end users in mind so that they make the right decisions and they can understand what the risks are of that. If you design it from a security point of view, from a security excellence perspective, then that security design is only going to live and breathe within the 2 or 3 people that understand it root to tip. And you'll get a plethora of poor decisions, as from your perspective, in the end user community, and a load of people going, I don't understand what these jobs are meant to do. A long-winded way of saying jobs are generally end user specific, and security is often back office or IT specific, and that's not technically correct, but that's often how it kind of manifests itself. But we need to join the two up.
Yeah, and looking at this from the SailPoint perspective, everything that Simon's just described there gets exaggerated when you move to the enterprise level, which is where effectively SailPoint is operating. You know, we're allowing organizations to define functional roles or other types of roles, geographic, location-based, whatever they might be. We're defining roles at that high level, so we need to consume the role components that are sat in these individual applications. So if we have an SAP environment where the roles are tightly coupled to the job functions, that obviously becomes much easier for us. It's much easier for us to recognize that and to incorporate those SAP functional roles into the wider enterprise level roles that we're going to be using for driving birthright provisioning and and governance controls. If we have a situation where the SAP roles are perhaps too tight and too constrained, we may find ourselves having to build in multiple SAP components into these enterprise level roles, and suddenly that becomes a bit of a management overhead, and somebody's really got to focus and concentrate on what's included in the SailPoint business role. Conversely, if the SAP roles are too wide and you have put in this leniency and there's a lot of scope, if we start building those into high-level enterprise business roles, we're potentially going to be opening up access to a wider audience than it needs to be. We're over-provisioning users in some cases. So it is Simon's absolutely right. It's a balancing act about, especially in this scenario where we have two layers of complexity. If we're dealing with Active Directory, for example, we don't really have that problem. We've just got effectively a flat set of groups that we can construct roles from. SAP is much more functional than that. So yeah, the two things really go hand in hand, which again is why you need SAP specialist assistance if you're deploying this kind of solution. The other way we do this is something that we've started to move into, which is using things like machine learning and artificial intelligence approaches to basically harvest everything that's out there at a very low level, and use peer group analysis and other techniques to try and figure out what the roles should look like, which is early days for the SAP environment, but it's another way to kind of tackle this.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're building roles on top of roles, and then getting artificial intelligence to help you with that, which is all heading in the right direction. Fantastic. I'm just aware of time, so if we can quickly move through this one. But what are the requirements to govern access with fine-grained compliance assertions?
So that, for me, again, is linking to the previous question really about what's the definition of secure, and how do we make sure that that's secure enough. So from that point of view, I think this is where we have to understand whether we're talking about access management or access governance, and those are two very different things, because the access management should be a lot about the processes and how to make it more seamless and more efficient in terms of the procedures to gain access and authorities to whatever it is that you're deemed as appropriate. But the access governance engine is really there to understand what those privileges ought to be, and it's almost that compliance view to say this is deemed as legitimate and okay to assign. So for me, again, it comes all the way back to those ubiquitous control requirements about governing access. So I don't see that SAP is any different to any other application in the environment here when it comes to the core requirements that you need to be able to govern. You need to be able to demonstrate that you've assessed the legitimacy of these access requirements. The detail comes in at the more granular level when you're saying that we've got multiple different compliance objectives to meet, and the sensitivity or the criticality of this or these sets of applications mean that there's more that can go wrong if we get it wrong. So from that regard, that's when you're starting to look more significantly about the functional deployment of SAP, the requirement for segregation of duties, or the requirements to have more critical accesses identified up front and known about when they could cause disruption. So I gave a few examples earlier, but the ability to create a vendor and pay it within the same individual, obviously that's probably something you want to avoid. But also who could take down the system or who could reset passwords in that environment that means that any of these defined access controls are effectively undermined completely. So that could be a technical control or a technical cyber breach. If somebody can reset somebody's password, then they basically got the keys to the kingdom. So the different requirements for how you do it is almost up to you, but fundamentally from an audit and assurance point of view, they'll be looking to demonstrate some degree of control, whether that's preventative approvals or prescriptive approvals based upon given conditions, having regular reviews that checks that there's no bad decisions been made throughout the period, and dealing with super users or defined critical access in a slightly more timely manner to reduce down the risk of anything that goes wrong. But again, it depends on your individual compliance requirements as to how permissive you want to be and what level of rigor you want to have in that access governance scenario. And traditionally in the SAP environment, it will come with some sort of access control engine or risk reviews that you can place some degree of reliance upon. But not in every case. So it's a myriad of conflicting technology sets and engagement with the audit and assurance type stakeholders within the business to define exactly what the right level is.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to add very quickly, I know we're short of time, just the SailPoint perspective on that. You know, in many respects, we almost want to keep away from that fine-grained element of all of this. We're trying to abstract this to a level that is organizational and understandable by business users and application owners. So, you know, we want to try and leave the detail where it is as much as possible. We've actually made decisions around the technology in that respect as well. So, you know, quite often we have customers that are utilizing things like SAP GRC, access control, really as the manager of that fine-grained compliance. And you know, we can integrate with that from a SailPoint perspective. So if someone makes an access request at the very high level business role request is generated, we can do our own policy checking, which may be across multiple application layers. We can then pass that into something like SAP GRC and just let that do the detail level testing and assertion control, and actually give us the response back. You know, should we provision it or not? You know, a simple response from that. So yeah, again, there's different approaches here, but very much from our side, it's about abstracting a lot of this information.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and integration is key there. Fantastic. Right, guys. Well, thanks for that. Some absolutely great insight there. Absolutely, just aware of time. We've got a couple of minutes left. We have a live Q&A, so what we might do is just overrun by 5 minutes to answer a couple of questions, and then we'll pick up with the ones that we can't answer afterwards, because we've got quite a number of questions coming in. So thanks everyone for that. But yeah, if you've got any more questions, please do put in the Q&A window. And while you're doing that, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the big giveaway that SailPoint are kindly providing. So really a chance for all attendees to win a limited number of maturity assessments worth £1,200 or more. Essentially, what will happen is an IGA expert will help your team to understand where your organisation is on the IAM journey and where they want to go. We'll do this by looking at various different areas of IAM, so how you govern identity, how you provision access, JML processes, privileged access, basically everything that we've talked about today, really. Understanding what makes a successful IAM program. And we'll also do a bit of we'll score the maturity level and provide a report and recommendation on how to start or continue on your IAM journey, which will help you present the case to the right level within the organisation. So how do you win it? All you have to do is just email marketing@turnkeyconsulting.com, and we'll be allocating these on a first come first serve basis. So please do get emailing. Wish you all good luck, and we'll just move quickly on to the Q&A. So what I'll do is, for those of you that have to drop off because we're slightly overrunning, I'll just thank you for joining. We will answer a couple of questions now, and I believe this will be available on demand afterwards if you do miss that. And if we don't answer your question live, what we will do is we'll reach out to you directly to answer that question. So just wanted to pick up a couple of questions here. There was one I saw around success factors. Just bear with me a second.
Yeah, I think there was a question about success factors. I just answered that in the Q&A. But we certainly SailPoint provides connectors for success factors in both of our technology platforms.
Okay, and the other one, there was a point earlier around the SOD and critical access. So the risk analysis, is it managed at the right level? I assume that was a question for SailPoint. So I guess, Mark, where does SailPoint, how does it manage SODs? Obviously across applications, but at what level within SAP?
Yeah, good question. So we could certainly define cross-application SOD policies. That's something we've always been able to do. When we're dealing with SAP specifically, as I mentioned earlier, we tend to take an abstracted view of this. So what we call the entitlement in SAP, we're actually modeling roles and profiles from the SAP world. That's kind of typically the level that we go to when we're looking at SAP. So we can obviously build segregation of duty policies that are looking at those elements, roles and profiles, compared with access in other applications as well. Now, that's not the absolute end of it. What we've done recently, we've enhanced some of our capabilities in the connectors in both of our technology platforms. So we can actually start going a little bit deeper. There's a little bit of work we still need to do in some areas, but effectively we can go down to the transaction code and the authorization object level as well. So if you really want to create a policy, an SOD policy in SailPoint, and check for the conflicting set of authorization objects, you can. However, would you want to is the second question. It's possible to do it. We don't provide any policies out of the box with the products, so everything that you check you would need to construct. So typically we only really see that used for very very high risk or very critical levels of access. In most situations, we would actually leave that fine-grained SOD checking to something like SAP GRC or Soterion or one of the other products out there that we work with.
And I think that's where we're filling that gap, particularly from the services point of view and the implementation side of things, that we're that bridge between the SAP technical layer to understand what's needed to be defining that in the right level of detail, and making sure that the right solution is deployed within the SailPoint or the other technology sets that are there. So we do come with ready to rock SAP based rule sets through our years of experience and all of the access to different client rule sets that we've provided over the time. But we're also helping SailPoint to understand where that is enough and where it isn't. So yeah.
I think the key thing here is the user experience, because all of this can be done from within SailPoint. So the SOD check is done within or the access request is carried out within SailPoint. That then reaches out to SAP to do the risk analysis, and the outcome of that feeds back into SailPoint. And so then from an audit perspective, the auditability can be done from one central place. From a user perspective, it's all done from one central place, albeit that's why integration is key, because you're leveraging both systems to do what it does best.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
Cool.
We've seen that coming through in a lot of different industry areas, that the sort of maturity curves goes with, we want different systems to be doing it what it does independently. Then the next maturity curve is, I want one system to do everything. And then more often than not, people find, well, actually that's not really working either. So what we do want is the best in class products integrated together to provide that multi-level assurance point of view. So SailPoint with SAP GRC is pretty much the top of the tree in those sorts of situations.
Absolutely. Top right, some might say. So I know we've overrun everyone, so yeah, we're out of time now. So I'd just like to say thanks for everyone for attending, and to our panelists, Simon and Mark. And just remember to submit your entries to marketing for the big giveaway. And if you need to reach out and ask any further questions, feel free to contact me direct. My contact details are on the screen, and our teams will be reaching out in due course to see if we can help you with anything. So just thanks again, and have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you.